Is your real estate investment, you're building in Ghana, you're buying an apartment in Ghana, is it a good one compared to other global markets? In this video, we will be sharing some ideas and thoughts comparing different markets from less matured market like Accra to one in Southern Africa, Cape Town, which is more matured, and then to really matured markets or city in Europe, for instance, Lisbon or Berlin. And for all of these, I'm actually speaking from experience. I've not gone to crunch data. There could be some things that I don't get accurately right, but directionally I believe it will be right or accurate in terms of what I say. So this is a question that anyone who is building or investing in some form of real estate in Ghana will have on their minds, and particularly for the diaspora, right? You'll be wondering, especially those who are buying apartments or sending money home for buildings to be done, seeing scriptures. A thought has to come through your mind. Are you actually doing the right thing? Are you getting ripped off? Is your investment too expensive? Is it going to pay off? Right. So today we are going to find all of that out by looking at all these markets and comparing the cold and hard numbers. But before that, let's look at some of the reasons that people actually build. It's not always about pure investment and getting your money back, right? For some people, it's about building something for their relatives, their mom, their children, leaving a legacy for them. For others, it's just about having a place they can come back to live in peace and comfort. And for some too, it's about having a foothold in the continent or something that connects them to their roots. People have various reasons and very good ones, and you can't fault people for that, right? You really have to do what makes you feel good. In our case, there are different reasons, and all of these reasons apply to us, but ultimately we had to be led and directed by God, right? And feel at ease to actually go forward to put in such a hefty amount to embark on this project of building. So if you are new to this, you can check out our channel. In our case, it's more on the building side, but this can apply to investments in already built apartments and all. And also just to call out, this is comparing real estate investment across markets. So it's not comparing with other investment types or portfolios like stocks or bonds and other things. That will not be the purpose of this video. So to help us analyze that, let's start with a practical challenge. What does approximately 60,000 USD get you in Accra, in Cape Town, and in Lisbon or in Berlin as of late 2025? Now in Accra, Ghana, for $60,000, your options are quite promising, right? You could secure a plot of land in a developing but well-regarded suburb like Oyarifa, Adenta, East Legon Hills today. And this amount can also cover the cost of building a really solid foundation and superstructure for this 3-bedroom house, if done well, And if you are looking for something that is ready-made, then you might find 1 or 2 bedroom apartments in new developments slightly outside the city center. I think when it comes to the prime areas in the city center, a studio would probably today costs around $90,000. And so that is where we are at with Accra. By the way, I didn't mention Accra is the big deal. That's my opinion, but we'll get back to that. Now let's fly over to the south, to Cape Town, South Africa, and for an equivalent of $60,000, which is roughly 1.1 million rand, you are likely looking at a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent but well-established neighborhood. They have student neighborhoods like Observatory or Rondebosch, and those are also very popular for young professionals, right? So those vibrant places, but what you are getting is actually a 1-bedroom apartment like in the area. And in those areas, the rental market is also really strong, right? So that's what you typically get in good place, reasonable place like Cape Town, in these suburbs. Good infrastructure, but forget about buying a land in these areas with that amount or in the city bowl or building from scratch at this price point. The market is far too matured for that. You'd probably have to move a little further out of these areas. So taking of that, and actually those are also really great options because they have very good interconnected road compared to even certain places in the middle of Accra, right? So something to be aware of. Now we are building up on a very important and practical challenge. So let's move on over to I said Lisbon as first, but let's use Berlin as an example. Berlin, Germany. So for an equivalent $60,000, which equates to about 55,000 euros, well, the reality is starkly different. You will not be buying an apartment with that amount. I mean, at the very most, you get a garage or a micro apartment in some of the outskirts if you are lucky. There are other places in these European countries where you can get things really cheap, right? But those towns or cities are characterized by people living, like, is it emigration? People living those places into big city, less vibrant. So it means that on the downside, if we are talking about investment, you are not actually going to necessarily get the type of appreciation you expect. But for a residential point of view, that can be really great. Like, so if you are living there, perfect. People also buy those for other reasons, like it helps them with their taxes by lowering it because of the mortgage that they are paying. By the way, those are things you get in places like Cape Town and Berlin or European countries or United States cities with ease, whereas in Accra the mortgage rates are actually pretty hefty, and I particularly think they are not reasonable at all. Anyways, so the entry barrier to a city, a vibrant city in Europe, is actually incredibly high, right? So and the 60,000 may only be able to cover your down payments and other costs related to the transfer, the notary, the agent commissions and other things. So not a whole lot. So just on comparison of the pure purchasing power, Accra, Ghana is a clear winner because you get much more for your money. But the purchasing power is only part of the story, right? There are other important factors like risk and demand, which I'm going to look at. By the way, the reason why I didn't compare Accra to Nigeria, partly because I haven't actually looked at or had the experience with the market. I have a few Nigerian friends, and so if you are interested in knowing that comparative analysis, just indicate that in the chat, and what I'll do is I'll interview them, because I normally want first-hand information than just browse through information and try to figure out, what is true and what is not. So let me know. I prefer to have those qualitative interviews and qualitative analysis than just like looking at some crunch of data without knowing what's on the ground. For instance, when we talk of risk in Ghana, the risk according to what you would find on ChatGPT is going to say something different from my own personal assessment of the risk in Accra based on my experience, or the risk in South Africa based on my experience of travels in all these cities and all those places. So I'm just letting it out there. So now let's look at the risk part, the economic, the political, and regulatory risk. In Ghana, at least from the perspective of the globalists, right, the biggest risk is economic and regulatory risk. I personally feel that Ghana is blessed and Ghana is actually heading in the right direction from here out. But just watch, and you can decide not to take my word for it, and just watch for the next couple of years. I'm pretty optimistic about that. Right. Okay. But what people normally point to is the cedi's volatility against the dollar and the concerns that it might erode the value of one's investment. Inflation also can drive up building costs. So if you are to start today, you expect that because of inflation alone, your building cost is going to go up by the time is completed, especially if it's done over a long stretch of time. And so with that is one big problem. There's also the regulatory and political risk. So if we speak of regulatory, I think one of the problems we have is the land registration process. It is extremely slow. It is bureaucratic. It is sometimes fraught with disputes over titles, and it's just a lot, right? So this is a significant risk. I would say like we were blessed because how we got our land was really straightforward. It was from someone we knew and absolutely trust. And I know people they've trusted and they've been duped, but I'm really talking about like real trust. Politically, Ghana is one of West Africa's most stable democracies. So that's a massive, massive plus. Now in South Africa, the rand is also said to be volatile. I actually don't think it's less volatile than the cedi for sure, right? And if you actually compare the 2017 or let's say 2016 rates to now, I don't think it's moved a whole lot if you compare it to other major currencies around the world. I think that the bigger concerns there would probably be around political stability and discussions around land expropriation without compensation, which is basically they take your land and then they don't compensate you. But even those I think are a bit overblown because they are really targeting specific use cases, and I don't think it affects people's properties per se. But that's important to speak about. Maybe people talk about economic factors that is creating more and more homeless people and causing more and more crime because of the wealth gap. And yeah, they do have a bit of some persistent energy crisis, but that's also pretty common in Western Africa. And but these things, it seems like things like homelessness and crime and other things can actually substantially and quickly affect property desirability in, let's say, Cape Town or South Africa than a place like Ghana for some reason, right? So that's something worth noting. However, the regulatory framework in South Africa is for property is world class, absolutely world class. Transactions are clear, titles are secure, and you won't have to even be sitting wondering whether you're being duped or not in most cases, because you're actually doing it with established lawyers who know their job and they go through all of that and get things registered for you. Now, in Germany, people talk about lower political risk. I think a fair balance is to say there is some risk politically and there is also some risk when it comes to the regulatory part. Now, politically, I think the hot topic is immigration, right? So anything can skew so much to one side where it becomes a problem for certain immigrants and stuff. So you just kind of need to be aware of that. But I don't think it's going to be something to elaborate because there are laws and there are certain things that are in place that prevent certain things from happening, particularly around real estate. So the political risk there is really low. It's not zero in my opinion, but it's low. And the euro is stable. It's a G10 currency, and the whole global economic system is a bit unfair and a bit manipulated, but that's a topic for another day. But like with this system, it's actually quite predictable. The market is slow moving, it's highly regulated, and so that may be on the negative side because then the costs of taxes, fees, everything is regulated. Agent commission can add up to 10-15% of the purchase price and all. Remember the 60,000 analysis we did? This agent commission and fees and taxes can eat up literally half all of it depending on the price of the property that you are buying, right? So that's one part. Now let's look at the investment risk by comparing prices and yield. In Accra, prices in prime areas like cantonments, or some would say cantonment, and let's say airport residential area can be actually high, right? It can range from $2,500 to $3,500 per square meter, and they quote in dollars for some reason. So those can actually rival certain European vibrant cities. I'm not talking about the non-vibrant, because you can get a $1 house in Italy, right? But then you have to commit to renovating and building it and then living there in the middle of nowhere because everyone has left the place and gone somewhere else. So those are not the ones I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual vibrant places where people want to live, and so you can actually make some rental yield, which is why sometimes it doesn't make complete sense to say, oh, Accra is this, it has Red Road and all of that, but like compared to a well-developed city and that has all the amenities, and then go like, well, to invest in Accra is just a pure bad investment, because it's about different factors like the risk, the price, the yield, the demand, which I'll be touching on. All of that has to be looked at to actually decide whether some cities apartment or some cities property is actually a rip-off or not. But in developing suburbs in Accra, where a lot of people are building these days, it's much lower and it offers huge potential for appreciation as the city expands. You realize that a city normally starts off really small and then the outskirts keep joining and it keeps growing like that. That's what Accra has become right now. So if you get in these suburbs, right, the potential for appreciation can actually be really high. Also, the rental yields can be attractive and can maybe gross around 8 to 10%. But then Accra may have slightly more challenge with getting reliable long-term tenants and also having your property managed for you, let's say when you are abroad or you are in the diaspora. That can be challenging. Now compare that to Cape Town, and the prices in like the Atlantic seaboard, places like Sea Point, can be astronomical. It can be compared to Accra, which starts at 2,500 for places like Cantonment, Airport residential area. Cape Town can start from $5,000 per square meter, right? So the prices are definitely higher there. When people say, oh, there is this property which is 300,000 in Springtest, yes, I agree. They are quite expensive for Ghana and doesn't really fit the pockets of the locals. But like compared to other places, you can kind of understand why people price it that way. And there seem to be market and people are buying those. I mean, my personal recommendation is get a place on the suburb, build your house to your taste, and then watch the appreciation happen over a period of time, because the city is always expanding if you are looking at it from a pure investment perspective. So back to Cape Town, it's a matured market. Cape Town has had this explosive growth over the last couple of years. It may not necessarily continue in that way, so you probably will be looking at a certain level of appreciation which might not necessarily compare, but there is great appreciation of property there. Rental yields are also going to be generally lower, maybe 5% to 7% thereabout. But the rental market is really deep and highly formalized. So it makes it easier to manage. It makes it easier to get another agency to manage your property without even seeing your property. That's how good it is. I think there are some real estate companies which are taking up that mandate in Ghana to do that, and kudos to them, but it is not formalized, right? So it depends on how good they are and how they want to keep the image of their brand going. But generally, it's formalized in a place like Cape Town. In Berlin, the prices are high per square meter, extremely high. But the rental yields are also notoriously low. And that's because there is really high regulation, right? So prices can go up, but then there are caps on rent and how much it can go up, and someone can literally live in your apartment and you can not eject them like forever. That is how much regulation has been put on in places like this. So in a place like Berlin, it's great if you are thinking of capital preservation and you want some slow, steady appreciation and not necessarily for cash flow. And some people also use it as a way to lower their taxes, because then if you are paying other costs, then your general tax goes down. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is demand in this market. Demand. In Accra, the demand is fueled by maybe 3 forces. There could be a couple of them, but the growing middle class is one of those. There is still a growing middle class, not as fast as you would expect, but it's there. You only have to step out in Accra to go to some places and see how people are living their lives to know that there is a certain growth in the middle class. It's not a whole lot, but it's still there. There's also the diaspora returning or investing back home. And the other thing is Ghana is positioned as a stable hub in West Africa. Stable political environment and safe environment. So it's attracting foreign nationals and foreign businesses. I know that some are leaving, but definitely some are coming, and the interest is still there. So this diverse demand is still there, and it's kind of good for the long term to ensure that properties are not just going to drop to zero. The reason why property prices, in my opinion, don't drop or does not get disrupted quickly compared to other places is most properties are bought with cash, like with what people have, not with mortgage, not with credit. So there's no pressure on people to offload properties, to sell them in order to prevent having to pay hefty interest rates and other things, right? So those are reasons why a property may be empty, but the owner is happy to just sit on this. And perhaps one of the reasons people buy is just with the thought that they are just maintaining the value of their money, and they don't necessarily care too much about the cash flow, even if it's something that they would enjoy if it came to them. Now, if we compare demand in Cape Town has a status as a top global tourist destination. It's a hub for internal migration, what is called semi-migration or semi-migration, right? Where people from other provinces move to this place. So whenever you take a city, you take Lagos, you take Accra, it sometimes doesn't help to just compare price and go like price cost this in Lagos or cost that in Accra and stuff like that. You have to look at other reasons, and if they add up for you, then definitely go for it, right? It's about some of these factors. It's better to kind of understand that. If you take a place like Berlin, it's a global magnet for tech talents, artists, young people all over Europe, right? So the demand, whilst it used to be a cheap place compared to other major European capitals, has like just ticked up, and it has become an economic powerhouse. So let's bring it all together. Is your real estate investment in Ghana a good one? I'll put it this way. If your goal is to get the most for your money, most land, most square footage, and you have a bit of an understanding of the risk. I won't even say risk tolerance, because if you understand the risk, it's maybe depreciation or regulatory or political, like you can break it down. And if you have a good understanding of that, risk is mostly for some people what they don't understand, right? So to get the most for your money, looks like Ghana is unparalleled, because you can look at other countries when you're interested in them, and if that meets your other reasons, like, oh, maybe you are Nigerian, you want to live in Lagos anyways, or maybe you are Rwandan, you want to live, in Rwanda anyways, then like that makes sense, right? So, but the potential for high capital appreciation and strong rental is very real, and it happens in Ghana. People are selling, and making profits. I feel sometimes excessive, but that's the reality on the ground, right? So your investment will be a bet on continued growth and stability of Ghana's economy, and I feel like it will. The risk with currency devaluation and bureaucratic hurdles, I think the bureaucracy is something we have to solve, really, and those are important to consider. Like, you don't want to lose your land, right? So definitely consider that, but the reward can be substantial if you do figure it out. But if you want more stable, predictable investment in a mature market, have things managed for you whilst you are not even around, or you don't care to even see the property with less risk, then you're likely to go to a place like Cape Town. It's really solid choice. There are other places all over Africa and all over the world like that, and you get lower returns in return, at least in some places. Definitely, if you have some hot places, hot tips, put that in the comments. Let's learn from that. Now, finally, if your primary goal is capital preservation, maybe if you are a resident in those European countries, for instance, then maybe to help with your taxes and minimize risk above all, like you want a place which will just preserve your capital, then maybe historically you want to choose a place like Berlin, maybe consider as a safe haven, but you have to have a lot of capital, significant capital to deploy, or be willing to take on debt to deploy. So it's a question of, are you going to put down $500,000 or do an equivalent $200,000 in Accra for the same? Yeah, so that makes some of these vibrant cities in Europe and in the United States other parts of the developed world, not accessible to, let's say, the average investor, unless you go through certain instruments like the REITs, right? And in some of these European places, you won't generate significant rental income. So I just want to conclude by saying that ultimately, the numbers show that investment in Ghana isn't a ripoff and isn't a bad investment. It's really about understanding the situation on the ground, the trade-offs, the risk, the reward, and the price you pay for entry into the developing markets, and how much upside you can actually get in addition to how much you are getting for your money itself is just amazing. So the question isn't or shouldn't be about whether it's a good investment. It's a question of, does it fit your financial goals, your tolerance, and more importantly, those reasons for building. You're building the first, right? If you are building for family, building future, building for your connection, your roots, there's certain value you are creating that goes beyond what any market analyst, perhaps especially this type of market analyst, can do to change that. So what are your experiences building or investing in Ghana or other parts of the world? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your story. If you found this analysis helpful, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe. See you. God bless you.